Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
And once again, that's the sound of rock cracking. You've got Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. And this week's show, we have Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives. He is on for an exclusive interview with Doc Holliday. We're working to get his line opened up. He's in Rome, Italy, but he's calling in to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. We're going to get him on the line in 2 or 3 minutes here. But first, let me just tell you that July 4th, we celebrated it, but we've never had an American celebration of July 4th under this dark cloud of the coronavirus. So I hope you'll continue to pray for America, continue to pray for a cure, for a treatment. These things, our scientists and the people in the medical field are working 24 hours a day. Continue. Do not give up hope, because there's something good going to come. It's coming. Can't tell you when, but it's coming. Keep praying. Keep working. And now, I just have to say, we are at a tipping point in America. Are we going to hang on to freedom and liberty like we've talked about on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics for years now? Are we going to go on the expressway toward socialism? We are on our way now, folks. Look all around you. Look around you and see what's going on in this country. And this election coming up in November will have crucial consequences, one way or the other. And I believe it's a slingshot election. Why? Because if Donald Trump wins, he continues to put more judges on the federal bench, possibly get a couple of picks on the Supreme Court, and if we can keep a Republican Senate and get a Republican House, we can make waves for freedom and liberty. But if Trump loses, and if the Senate goes over to the Democrats, and Pelosi remains Speaker of the House, we will be on an expressway to socialism, and freedom of speech will be gone, folks. We'll lose our constitutional right. Just look at what's happening. People are losing their jobs. People are being shut down. If you say something that some snowflake doesn't want to hear, then you are shut down. You are pulled off social media. You're putting time out on Facebook. All these things that we never thought or if we could even dream about happening in America, it's happening. People talking about defunding the police, and in New York City taking $1 billion out of the police department's budget. And AOC, the congresswoman from New York, AOC, says it's not enough. Defund the whole department. And this is the America that we are looking at. Folks, it's time to get on your to get on the soapboxes. This is an election unlike any other. They say that every time, but we are talking about which way America is going to go. So it's important that everybody gets involved to keep freedom and liberty in America. So that's why we have the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, calling in from Rome, Italy. Let's see if we can get him on the line right now. Please welcome Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, host of the Newt's World podcast at Gingrich360.com, and the author of 40 books, including his latest, Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time. Welcome to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics, Mr. Speaker.
Well, it's great to be with you, and it's very exciting. We just learned a few minutes ago that we're on the New York Times bestseller list. So,
well, congratulations.
I think, Trump and the American future has a lot to say for this particular election year.
Well, in the book, you say this election represents the most decisive choice Americans will make since 1860, which was the election of President Abraham Lincoln and ultimately led to the U.S. Civil War. Why is this election as serious and vital as that one?
Well, I think it's not about Trump versus Biden, but it's about Biden and Pelosi and Schumer. And if you look at what the left is, how they're behaving right now, imagine that they controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency. I think within a year or two, the whole country would be somewhere between California and Seattle and moving to a very different world. I mean, you'd have radical reduction in the police forces. I think crime would go sky high. You'd have no control over the borders, so immigration would be wide open. And you'd have huge increases in government, and a real effort to control what we're allowed to say. You'd have a kind of very coercive end of free speech, if you will, and then the rise of controlled speech, which we've never seen in America, but you see it coming. I mean,
right.
Everything I'm describing, you can see right now. So I think Trump will take us in a direction of a classical America with free enterprise and decentralization and less bureaucracy and more freedom. And Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer will take us to a world which is really a replacement for America. It's not fixing America, but it's actually creating a new system and a very different system.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what you're just describing, one time I call it like a slingshot election, because usually if you get beat, you think, okay, in 4 years we can try to get this back. But whoever wins this coming election is going to be way ahead. I'm talking about conservative or socialist, because if Trump gets it, he'll get a lot more judges, the Supreme Court possibly, judge picks. But like he just said, if Pelosi and Schumer and Biden are in charge, we're going to go directly the other way. And so it is.
That's exactly right.
It's really scary when you think about it, how important this election is.
Well, and that's why I wrote Trump and the American Future, because I wanted to have a handbook so that people who wanted to be able to argue with their neighbors and their friends would have the facts and the figures and the information to make the case. I think it is. I don't know of any election where I have been as worried as I am today, and where I think that the future is as radically different depending on which side wins.
Well, one thing we've talked about before here on Rock Splitting Politics, going back, the U.S. Constitution signed in 1788, about every 70 to 80 years, major milestone. First one was the Civil War. 75 years after that, then we had the Great Depression, ended up with World War II. We're 75 years after World War II, and we are in a watershed moment. I mean, we could swing and maybe be conservative for the next 70 years if Trump wins, or we can, like you said, swing further to socialism like this country has never seen before. And when you look at,
I think to paraphrase Lincoln at Gettysburg, he said that we're engaged in a great struggle to decide whether this nation or any nation conceived in freedom can survive.
Right.
And I think that when you look at the people on the left today, they're totalitarians. They are prepared to, they try to cut out every advertiser that Tucker Carlson has, even though he's currently the highest-rated show in the history of cable television. They get people fired for saying the wrong thing. I just read a really sad story about a guy who had 9 yoga centers in Denver, and several people on the left decided that he wasn't sufficiently sensitive. They destroyed him. All 9 centers have been closed. He's now mortgaging his house to pay off the debts. They just drove him out of business. And that's the kind of hostility and tyranny that we're seeing come out of the left right now. And you see it in New York, where they have crowds gathered every day. They have demonstrations. The murder rate is skyrocketing, and the answer of de Blasio on the left is take $1 billion out of the police department, do not hire the 1,300 rookies that were scheduled to come in, and make a much weaker police force in the face of a dramatic rise in crime. I mean, to normal common sense Americans, it doesn't make any sense. But if you're a left-wing ideologue, it makes perfect sense.
Well, in your book, you talk about an ideology in the Democratic Party which hates police and protects criminals. And how does this relate to the massive protest against police misconduct we're seeing across the country? And what is the best way to restore trust in law enforcement while still ensuring that African Americans are treated fairly in law enforcement?
Well, I think the key is to be for reform, not repudiation. I mean, first of all, most policemen, including a substantial number of African American and Latino policemen, want to do the right thing, try to do the right thing, and risk their lives every single day. I mean, you know, if you're out there and you pull over a car and you start to walk up to that car, you have no idea whether or not that guy has a pistol in the front seat. And we really underestimate how much policemen put on the line to try to help the rest of us. Now, do we need better training? Yes. I actually think in places like Chicago, where they had 18 Americans killed in one day, they need probably 3 times as many police as they have. They need to be better trained, and I personally favor having a body camera on every policeman so you can track their day. But I think this idea that the answer, you know, that when you look at who really is killing African Americans, it's overwhelmingly not the police. Somebody said they're 300 times more likely to be killed by a criminal, and yet, you know, the young 16-year-old African American boy was killed in Seattle in that autonomous zone a couple of nights ago. You know, you didn't see anybody show up to protest because he wasn't politically correct. He was just killed by a criminal. If he'd been killed by a policeman, you'd have had a mob, and you'd have had demonstrations, and you'd have had CNN devote 2 hours to covering him. But I think we have to stand up and say that we are not going to let the country be taken over by radicals, many of whom are ignorant, and many of whom are anti-American.
Mr. Speaker, when you say that, one of the things that that concerns me, concerns our listeners, that we've talked about this, is we look at people like, say, John Bolton, who worked with Trump, and now he's against Trump, says he won't vote for Trump. Can people who are never Trumpers, can they understand the importance of this election, that they have to cast their vote, even if it's for Trump? They have to do it for the future of America. How do you wrestle with people like this?
You know, I do a free newsletter at Gingrich 360. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote a newsletter on the first year of the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer administration, and how radical it would be and how bad it would be. And that's what puzzles me about all of these, you know, so-called never Trumpers. It's not like it's Trump versus perfection. It's Trump versus a hard left which hates America. And I think the idea that these folks think that they're morally superior because Trump is somehow unworthy of their vote. Well, the alternative is going to be a left-wing system that oppresses the American people and that cripples us in the world, and that kowtows to China and virtually guarantees that China will become the dominant country in the world. And a guy like Bolton, who I've known for years, I don't understand him. I mean, how can you go in, be the national security advisor, and all of a sudden come out, take $2 million, write a book that everybody in the administration says is not true, and then announce that you're too morally principled to vote for Trump? Well, that just sounds to me like a guy who's bitter. But I worry about the number of moderate Republicans who think that they will be virtuous if they help elect Biden, because they're not looking at the machine Biden will put in charge. And as you know from watching him, Biden is so weak that a Biden presidency means that Pelosi and Schumer will call all the shots.
Absolutely. I know we're running the end of the interview here, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic plays a significant role in your book as you were writing as the virus started spreading. Now, what have you learned since you finished the book, and what are the most important aspects of the pandemic that people should learn from and focus on?
Well, first of all, I always refer to it as the Chinese virus because I think it's purely political correct baloney to invent a name because they don't want to offend the Chinese. Second, I think what you're about to see is the virus get dramatically weaker. And if you'll notice, what used to be the news media, which has increasingly become just a propaganda media.
Absolutely.
They don't want to tell you that the number of people who are dying is going down. The number of people who are going to intensive care units are going down, and that with massive testing, 500,000 or 600,000 a day, we're discovering a lot of cases. But in many of the instances, the case was so mild the person didn't even know they had it. So the media jumps to this huge number and says, "Look at this great spike." But there was an article this morning pointing out that the death rate in Florida now is 10% of the death rate in New York 3 months ago.
That's a great item that most people are forgetting about. The death rate is not shooting up at this point.
That's right, and most of the people who are getting the virus are under 40, and if you're under 40, the virus apparently, unless you already have a precondition like a heart or a respiratory problem, the virus doesn't affect you. And in fact, as I said, one of the things that's really interesting is a lot of these people didn't even know they had it because they had no symptoms at all.
Before you go, what can Americans who want to do something? I mean, you can't rally, you can't have a Tea Party rally, can't protest, all this. So what do people, what can they do right now?
Talk to all of your friends, all of your neighbors, all your coworkers, and get across, and this is, again, why I wrote Trump and the American Future, get across to them how really, really big this election is and why it's desperately important if America is going to survive to have Donald Trump win.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for coming on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics.
Thank you.
That was the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, coming to us right here exclusively with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics, calling in from Rome, Italy, where his wife is the ambassador to the Vatican, U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. So we appreciate him coming on the show. In just a couple minutes, I got a few comments on what he had to say. But first, let me remind you, you're listening to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net. We have a show every Monday morning, put up a new show, and you can go into our archives and look at our past shows. That's what I love about webtalkradio.net. They've worked with us for years, and we have got a great accumulation of what's going on in American history of the last few years. Just go into the archives and look through the headlines, find some shows you might have missed, and listen to them. Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics has gone into some issues that other people just not going to cover. And we got some great people that have written books, just like Newt's new book that is, we told you about, the Trump and the American Future, solving the great problems of our time. And as Newt just told you, he just found out it's hit New York's Times bestseller list. So you were one of the first to know that, and we're glad that he got on our show and gave us this exclusive interview. But let me remind you, we also have a book here, and Doc Holliday has written a book called Bedrock Truths. I didn't write it by myself. I had the help of Dr. Alveda King, and that's the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and also Dr. Alex McFarland. We put together this book, Bedrock Truths. If you don't have that book, you can go to the picture. There's a picture on our website here on webtalkradio.net, and you can see the picture of the book called Bedrock Truths. If you just click on that, it'll take you to my website, which is www.docholliday.org. There you can order the book. Got some more books you can order. We'd love to get one out to you. This is a very important election year. It's said that every presidential election year. We've heard it all our lives, but folks, there could be no clearer picture. And you heard me discuss with former Speaker Newt Gingrich about John Bolton. John Bolton's going around, he worked with President Trump, says he can't vote for him. Well, what's he want? And he says he's not going to vote for Biden. Well, folks, this election, you don't have time to say, okay, I'm just going to vote third party. No. You heard what Newt was saying. You want to defund the police force across the nation? Do you want lawlessness in this land? I mean, you can't be a never Trumper. You can't love freedom and liberty and sit out this election or vote for a third party. That's Doc Holliday talking, and I'm telling you, in the next few months, it gets down to which choice you want: freedom and liberty, or you want to give up your First Amendment right of freedom of speech. Will you find anybody on the left now who's defending the freedom of speech and the snowflake generation? And I love young people, and there's some great young people who are standing up for liberty and freedom. We need to support them. But I'm telling you, there's a whole slew of snowflakes out there that don't want to listen to anybody's freedom of speech. And there's a whole slew of people out there that's being controlled by the anarchist. And I hope you'll go back in our archives, listen to our shows. We had Reverend William Owen in his book, A Dream Derailed, how the left hijacked the civil rights to create a permanent underclass. And go back and listen to our show with Reverend William Owens. We also, we've had several African American authors, and just go back in our archives and look for those. Listen to them. It's so important now to know what's going on in this country. And that's why this interview of former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich today is helping us visualize and understand how important on this week where we've just celebrated the 4th of July, but to put into perspective what's coming into focus, how important this election is. And we see the riots, the chaos, the inner cities across America that's in turmoil, and yet we got leftists wanting to defund the entire police departments. Wake up, America. We got to get involved. Wake up. Keep listening to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. Keep fighting for liberty and freedom. The U.S. Constitution's unlike any other document in the entire world in the history of constitutions. There's a reason why America became the greatest nation on earth. And some people say America never was great. We've never been perfect, but we've had framers who encouraged us to form a more perfect union. We are in the process of that. You cannot sit out this election. You cannot sit out. If you love freedom and liberty and love your children and grandchildren, this is the time to get involved. We asked Newt, what do you do now? He says, start talking to your friends and family. Get a list of those. Ask them if they're registered to vote. If they're not registered to vote, there's so many people who have not registered to vote, don't want to do anything with politics. Tell them this year it's different. You must get registered. You must get out and vote. The life of our nation and freedom and liberty depend on it. Get involved. Get involved today. God bless America. God bless you. Thank you for listening to this special edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. We'll be back next week for another great show. And let me just say, I appreciate your support. I appreciate your listening. Tell your friends and neighbors. Give them links to this show. We continue to grow and get our message out because you tell your friends and neighbors to tell people to listen to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. God bless you. God bless America. God bless this nation who is in this process of self-government, and we have a decision to make of which direction this country is going in just a few months. Get involved now in your local House race, local Senate races, and in this presidential race. Get involved now. See you next week.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to listen again next week for another edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You can order Ed's new book, Bedrock Truths, by clicking on the book cover right in front of you on the screen, or visit docholliday.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.